Ted Williams wrote a book called The Science of Hitting, and in it he had a picture of himself at bat and the strike zone broken into, I think, 77 squares. And he said if he waited for the pitch that was really in his sweet spot, he would bat 400, and if he had to swing at something on the lower corner, he would probably bat 235. And in investing, I'm in a no-called strike business, which is the best business you can be in. I can look at 1,000 different companies, and I don't have to be right on every one of them or even 50 of them. So I can pick the ball I want to hit. And the trick in investing is just to sit there and watch pitch after pitch go by and wait for the one right in your sweet spot. And if people are yelling, swing you bum, ignore them. There's a temptation for people to act far too frequently in stocks simply because they're so liquid. Over the years, you develop a lot of filters. And I do know what I call my circle of competence. So I stay within that circle, and I don't worry about things that are outside that circle. Defining what your game is, where you're going to have an edge, is enormously important. I bought the first shares of Berkshire in 1962, and it was a northern textile business destined to become extinct eventually. And it was a statistically cheap stock in a terrible business. Berkshire Hathaway was closing mills, and as they closed mills, it would free up some capital, and then they would repurchase shares. So I bought some stock with the idea that there would be another tender offer at some point, and we would sell the stock at a modest profit. And at one point, the management asked me at what price we would tender our stock, and I said $11.50. And the tender offer came out a few months later, and it was at $11 3/8, which is an eighth of a point cheaper. And that made me very mad, so I just started buying more stock. I just felt that I'd been double-crossed by the management, and in May of 1965, I bought enough so we controlled the company, and we changed the management.
That was a pretty silly way to behave, as Warren has recounted in retrospect. One of the reasons Warren's successful is he's brutal in appraising his own past. He wants to identify misthinkings and avoid them in the future. But it was an accident that he chose Berkshire Hathaway. If the chairman hadn't tried to cheat him out of an eighth, there wouldn't have been any Buffett-Berkshire Hathaway history.
If you're emotional about investment, you're not going to do well. You may have all these feelings about the stock. The stock has no feelings about you. Looking back, it's interesting, that tender offer, I didn't realize it, but it happened about 5 days after my dad had died. And whether that had affected me or not, I don't know.
Do you remember your last conversation with your father?
Yeah, but I don't want to talk about it.
I think it just sobered him and hurt him. But Warren soldiers on. Both Warren and I could look at our fathers and see what they did right and what they did wrong. Warren's father was a real old-fashioned right-wing ideologue. And his father was so intense about it that Warren just decided that it was a mistake. It cabbaged up your head to be that much of an ideologue. So he loved his father, but he didn't want to become that much of a true believer in anything.
My politics became more overt after my dad died. Civil rights changed my views. You know, in 1776, Thomas Jefferson wrote, all men are created equal, and then when they wrote the Constitution, they all of a sudden decided that, no, it was just 3/5 of a person if you were black. I mean, that struck me as kind of crazy.
I was talking to him one day about some racial issue, and he said to me, wait till women discover they're the slaves of the world. Now, how many men were cognizant of that, and even women then.
The initial example is really my mother. She came from a generation where the main function of the wife was to help her husband in the job. And my sisters are fully as smart as I am. They got better personalities than I have, but they got the message a million different ways that their future was limited, and I got the message that the sky is the limit. And it wasn't due to a lack of love or anything of the sort. It was the culture. On the other hand, you can look at the flip side of that and say it's quite encouraging, because if you look at what this country accomplished, only using half of its talent, just think of the potential for the future. I'm enormously bullish on America over the future, and part of the reason is that we, by some rather stupid decisions, essentially put half our talent on the sidelines.
Warren is probably the most rational person I've ever met. Charlie Munger would be a close rival. And Charlie became a man that Warren depended on heavily. And I think his first experiences in the discarded cigar butt era convinced him that it was not exactly where he wanted to be.
He'd made so much money for so long doing what he'd been taught by Ben Graham, which is to buy these very cheap stocks. And if they were cheap enough, he didn't care it was a lousy company and a lousy management. He knew he was going to make money anyway just because of the cheapness. Charlie Munger has had a big impact on me in moving me toward looking for wonderful companies at fair prices rather than fair companies at wonderful prices. And that was enormously important because it enabled Berkshire to scale up in a way that would have been impossible to do otherwise.
Yep. What are the key indicators you look for within companies before making an investment?
Well, I look for something that does give them a moat around it. We have a company called See's Candy out on the West Coast. See's Candy is boxed chocolates. If you give a box of See's chocolates to your girlfriend on the first date and she kisses you, we own you. I mean, we can raise the price tomorrow and you'll buy the same box. You're not going to fool around with success. So the key there is the response. You do not want to go home on Valentine's Day and say to your wife or your sweetheart, preferably they're the same person, you don't say, "Here, honey, I took the low bid." It doesn't work. Price is, to a degree, is immaterial. If you've got an economic castle, people are going to come and want to take that castle away from you. And you better have a strong moat. You better have a knight in the castle that knows what he's doing.
You're not buying an asset. You're buying a name. You're buying a brand. You're buying a real franchise here. And Charlie was more responsible for that than anybody.
We were mental partners right from the moment we met.
I want to know, going back 50 years, what it was like when you first met Warren.
Well, I thought he was a prodigy. And I got a lot of criticism. My wife said, "Why are you paying such enormous respect to that young man with a crew cut who won't eat vegetables?"
He's ungodly smart. He's got a much broader intellect than I do. And he's magnificent at being able to condense important ideas into just a very few words.
If you're not interested in the economic scene right now, you're mentally dead.
Charlie has no tact.
All right, let's talk a little bit about bankers. Charlie on Friday compared them to heroin addicts.
Yeah, well, that's colorful, Charlie, but I would not have chosen that.
I once wrote of him that when they handed out humility, he didn't get his fair share.
The ideal way to run a headquarters is to have one man, preferably over 80, sitting in an office by himself. Anything else is pure frippery.
He's always honest in what he tells me, so I listen to him.
We never had an argument. We just kind of roll with it easily. Suppose Warren doesn't want to do something that I would have done. And suppose that happens 4 times over 40 years or something. What the hell difference does it make to me? Net, the record is working out fine. Both of us know that we've done better by having ethics. Warren's not interested in making money by cheating people.
Warren's opinions of Wall Street investment bankers would not endear him to their mothers. He feels that they're, for the most part, not out for their clients. They're out for their own business interests.
In the late 1960s, there were just a flood of accounting shenanigans and mergers built upon false accounting and misleading people. It was a time when a lot of charlatans were prevailing in Wall Street and were being applauded by Wall Street. And I understood what the game was about, but I didn't want to play in it. So I closed down the partnership at the end of 1969, and I took on the title of chairman for Berkshire Hathaway.
Well, I think the modern Berkshire is pretty much all a reflection of Warren.
I have constructed a business that fits me. It's kind of crazy to spend your life painting if you're painting a subject you don't want to look at. I've gotten to paint my own painting in business on an unlimited canvas, in a way. It's a different sort of place. I work with a great group of people that make my life very easy and that take good care of me. We have 25 people in the office, and if you go back, it's the exact same 25, the exact same ones. We don't have any committees at Berkshire. We don't have a public relations department. We don't have investor relations. We don't have a general counsel. We don't have a human relations department. We just don't go for anything that people do just as a matter of form. It's exactly the life I like. And it's not work to me. It's just a form of play, basically. No, I like things quiet. I shut the door, actually, at the office because I don't want to hear anybody talking outside. And I still probably spend 5 or 6 hours a day reading.
Look at what's trending today. Our quick roundup of what has you talking.
Well, what's amazing is the stuff he remembers. It's like a little computer, you know. I keep thinking the hard drive will run out of space, but it doesn't.
He's one of the smartest people we know. So I was at a couple of the family dinners at the Gates house where Mary, Bill's mom, was trying to convince him to come out to the family place at Hood Canal to meet Warren Buffett. And he was resisting because he was really busy with Microsoft. And finally he said, Mom, okay, I'll come for lunch.
So the two of us flew out there somewhat reluctantly because, you know, buying and selling stocks, which is how I thought of Warren, wasn't of particular interest to me and didn't seem like value added. It turned out that was completely wrong. We knew that day that we'd be very close friends. In fact, we just couldn't get enough of each other.
Shortly after I met Bill Gates, Bill's dad asked each of us to write down on a piece of paper one word that would best describe what had helped us the most. Bill and I, without any collaboration at all, each wrote the word focus. Well, focus has always been a strong part of my personality. If I get interested in something, I get really interested. If I get interested in a new subject, I want to read about it, I want to talk about it, and I want to meet people that are involved in it.
We both love to work hard. You know, neither of us like frivolous things. You know, he doesn't know much about cooking or art or a huge range of things.
I can't tell you the color of the walls in my bedroom or my living room. I don't have a mind that relates to the physical universe well.
Warren checking the Dow.
But the business universe, I think I understand reasonably well.
Warren's ability to size up people and businesses, it's a pretty magical thing.
He is the best at that of anybody we know.
We should all try to be 20% as good at that.
I like to sit and think. And I spent a lot of time doing that, and sometimes it's pretty unproductive, but I find it enjoyable to think about, particularly about business or investment problems. They're easy. It's the human problems that are the tough ones. Sometimes there aren't any good answers with human problems. There's almost always a good answer with money.
He was sort of a genius. I think sometimes geniuses are by default lonely and isolated. He was not really well adjusted. He was just this funny, humorous guy who maybe had a moat around him because he was afraid and he didn't know anyone that he wanted to let in. And to this day, I don't know, well, nobody knows him like I do, and probably any wife would say that. But,
he's a loner in a sense. And it's difficult to connect on an emotional level because I think that that's not his basic mode of operation.
He was there, physically, but he was upstairs reading all the time. I always told my mother we have to talk in sound bites. I learned that early on, that if you start, going into some long thing, unless you've explained to him ahead of time that it's going to be a long thing and you need him to hang in there, you lose him. You lose him to whatever giant thought he has in his head at the time that he was probably thinking about before you came in and really wants to get back to.
He's not like the rest of us. I don't think my dad ever took anybody for granted, but you are a little bit blind, I think, sometimes to what other people might be doing behind the scenes. And my dad's gotten a little bit of a pass.
Warren can't find the light switch, and it's probably my fault. One time, years ago, when the kids were little, I was feeling really sick. I had the flu, so I lay down on the bed, and I said to Warren, will you get me a pan or something from the kitchen? I may not get to the bathroom. I feel so sick. He said, okay. So he trotted down to the kitchen, and I hear this bang, biff, boom, bang. And he comes up, and he brings me a colander, and I looked at it, and I said, look, honey, this has holes in it. Oh, okay. So he ran down, all this banging, and he comes up, and he puts the colander on a cookie sheet. Physical proximity to Warren doesn't always mean that he's there with you. He's so cerebral, you see. And that's why I learned to have my own life. We were two parallel lines, but very connected when he was open to connecting.
I did make a joke at one point. I said, we could make a tape of Mom yelling, bye, Warren, I'll be back later, and then have the door slam, and you would just think she was here. I don't think he knew what she was doing most of the time. Once Howie and I were both gone, as we've gotten older, she started to see the writing on the wall here and, just started trying to figure out how she could at least have some more, she called it, a room of her own.
The worst mistakes involve not understanding other people as well as you might. Well, she left Omaha in 1977, and there really isn't much to say about that.
It was devastating for him. And I came home because I can't say I was mad at her exactly, but I kept thinking, how can you leave him? He can't function by himself. So my mother, she'd asked a bunch of her friends to sort of look in on him. And Astrid was one of them.
So I called Astrid. I said, Astrid, will you take one, make him some soup, go over there and look after him because he's not going to make it. And It took him a while to figure it out, but he figured it out. I said, I'm not leaving you because I'll be wherever you want me when you want me.
My mom moved to San Francisco, and I think one of the reasons it was important for her to leave Omaha was because she just felt like she was kind of trapped in this environment, that everybody knew who she was, that she, couldn't have her own identity.
He knew that there's something she needed to do, and that she really recognized that the money gave us all and her a choice in a lot of ways that a lot of people didn't have.
There was a time Warren was getting criticized that here was this very, very rich man who was getting richer every year and really wasn't giving a lot of money away. And there was terrific criticism by some people, which Warren never said anything about.
The biggest thing in making money is time. You don't have to be particularly smart, you just have to be patient. Susie didn't want to wait as much as I did, but she never quite appreciated compounding like I did.
That is a disagreement we have. I run a foundation now. I think we should be giving more money away. But I understand why we don't, because it's business. To me, the crux of it is that it wasn't the money itself. You can see that in the way he lives. I mean, he doesn't buy huge paintings or build big houses or anything like that. It's all mental with him. And the money is his scorecard. And he used to say to me, everybody can read what I read. It's a level playing field. And he loves that because he's competitive. And he's sitting there all by himself in his office reading these things that everybody else can read. But he loves the idea that he's going to win.
I'll tell you how you do it. Have you ever seen a juggler juggle 25 milk bottles? How did he ever get to do that? The answer is he started with 1 bottle, then 2, then 3, and just kept doing it, and pretty soon he was at 25. And that's the way we did it. So basically, we started out with cash and ended up buying a bunch of businesses, including insurance companies.
Insurance is in itself a profitable business, but it has the additional advantage of creating something that's called float. And float is the money that hangs around Berkshire while a claim is waiting to be paid. And Warren turned out to have an extraordinary ability to use the money thrown off by the float to buy companies that fed the growth of Berkshire.
In 1983, Mrs. B cashed in on her business by selling control for $55 million to a company owned by investor Warren Buffett.
Warren was quite an expert about newspapers. He got interested in the Post because he recognized it as a greatly undervalued company.
He had to write me a letter, Dear Mrs. Graham, I've just bought 5% of your company, and I mean you no harm. And I think it's a great company. I know it's Graham-owned and Graham-run, and that's fine with me. And I thought, whoa, this guy's really terrific. He used to come to board meetings with about 20 annual reports, and he would take me through these annual reports. I mean, it was like going to business school with Warren Buffett.
Kay Graham did introduce Warren to the world of Washington, an entirely different group than he had ever dealt with before.
It was clear that working with Kay gave him a different kind of confidence, and he was the star.
Everyone wants to hear what Warren Buffett has to say.
The Oracle of Omaha, building his image and having some fun.
Berkshire shares have increased more than 2,000% in value, one of the largest market capitalizations in the world, and it could grow a lot larger since Warren Buffett shows no sign of slowing down.
So how did he do it? By investing in what he knows and understands. Good old-fashioned American brands like Coca-Cola, Fruit of the Loom, and Dairy Queen.
What inspired you?
This inspired me.
Find what you like. Is that what
Yeah, absolutely. Today, the Coca-Cola Company will sell almost $2 billion 8-ounce servings of one form or another of Coca-Cola products. Now, if you get an extra penny a day, a penny a serving, that's $20 million a day. That's $7.3 billion a year from 1 penny more. When you own Coca-Cola, you own a little piece of the minds of billions and billions of people. That is really good.
Who's got the most $100 bills these days? Well, his name is Warren Buffett in this country, and he has just displaced his friend Bill Gates as the richest businessman in the world.
And the purpose of Wednesday's meeting was to discuss Buffett's company, Berkshire Hathaway's plan to purchase railroad giant Burlington Northern. Valued at $26 billion, this would be Buffett's largest acquisition ever.
He's created Berkshire from virtually nothing into hundreds of billions of dollars of market cap. Nobody else has a record like that.
He wanted to have an outstanding reputation, that he never really upset the apple cart when he bought a business, that he kept the management in place. He was establishing a reputation that paid off later in life. It's been building and building ever since I've known him.
It takes 20 years to build a reputation, and it takes 5 minutes to lose it.
When Warren made his investment in Salomon, I was one of the people, along with many, many others, who were quite amazed, because he had taken a very critical tone in talking about investment bankers and about their greed. And here he was investing in one, Salomon Brothers, that was known to be a member of the club.
Warren and Charlie went on the board, and Charlie couldn't stand what was going on there and didn't like the culture at all. And shortly after they got involved, the thing exploded.
In 1991, on a terrible day in August, I got a call, and the two top officers of Salomon were on the other end, and they said that we had a problem.
This is NBC Nightly News. Good evening. It is the kind of scandal that rocks Wall Street and raises questions about the integrity of our financial institutions.
With the giant securities firm of Salomon Brothers under investigation for improper trading of treasury bonds.
Salomon admitted it exceeded the limit of trading in government bonds, once by buying bonds in the name of a customer who didn't even know about the deal.
Salomon Brothers is under investigation by the Treasury Department, the Federal Reserve, the SEC, and the Justice Department. But more important than the fate of the firm itself is the impact their actions could have on the public trust and on the credibility of the American market worldwide.
The company owed $150 billion. It owed more money than any other private company in the United States at the time. And that night, I met with the man that ran the Federal Reserve of New York, who was the sheriff, in effect. And I said, I've never really owed very much money before. I said, I've got a little mortgage on a house, but $150 billion is a little staggering. And I was hoping he would say, well, don't worry, Warren, we'll give you a few weeks to breathe. And he said to me, prepare for any eventuality.
Earlier today, the U.S. Treasury Department announced that it had suspended Salomon Brothers from participating in the auction of new issues.
It was one more jolt for a scandal-scarred Wall Street.
The Fed was in effect saying, you're an evil force and we don't want you trading our bonds. It was a huge turning point for Warren. And he believed that at that particular point, his reputation was on the line.
Warren had 24 hours to make up his mind as whether he was going to go forward or just bow out. And I think at that point, Salomon Brothers could have gone into bankruptcy. And Warren stepped up and took responsibility.
Okay, I'm Warren Buffett. I was elected interim chairman of Solomon Inc. A few hours ago at a board of directors meeting.
Why was it necessary for you to step in, and what is your mandate of leadership?
I think that it was necessary to step in because I would do whatever was needed to dig out any bit of information about what's happened in the past, and I would do everything I could to make sure that things are exactly right in the future.
Are you satisfied that divorce?
I had to convince the Treasury that what was done in the past was awful and stupid, and they had every right to be furious at us. But this firm employed 8,000 people, and it was going to go out of business unless they let us continue, basically.
Warren believed that there was a too big to fail scenario. The term was not used then, but he believed that Solomon was too big to fail. And if Solomon went down, it would take other important parts of Wall Street with it.
We had this death knell from the Treasury, so I called the Treasury. Nick Brady was the secretary. You know, I'm pleading for my life, and I'm sure my voice was cracking and everything else. I said, Nick, this is the most important day of my life. And that I really did feel that it was going to be a colossal disaster. He wasn't sure I was right at all. In fact, he probably thought I was wrong, but he knew that I felt what I was saying.